Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Williams, and it is wonderful to have you all here today for our session on innovating everywhere, how Kubernetes is reshaping enterprise IT. We have an absolutely incredible packed agenda today that we are going to be taking you all through. And I'm joined by an incredible group of speakers. The team we're working with today is a collection of some of the brightest minds in the industry, many of whom have been working on Kubernetes for 5, 6 years now. And what we're hoping to do is give you really a complete, comprehensive look at what's happening as organizations are adopting this technology, what some of the broader industry trends look like, and how it's actually impacting real people. We're also going to spend a lot of time introducing Rancher to a lot of you who are coming to know us for the first time, and we're going to get into a little bit of depth on the technology. So our first session is going to be with Arun Chandrasekaran. Arun is an analyst at Gartner. Arun, you want to say hello?
Oh, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
And Arun will talk a little bit about kind of what's happening in the broader industry. After that, myself and Eamon Bowman will spend a bit of time introducing Rancher, talk to you about who we are, what we've been working on these last few years. And when we're wrapped up, we're then going to have an excellent panel with three presenters who come from industry and talk about their journey. Stefan Roskopf is joining us from Continental. And then Brad Linder is joining us from Dish Networks. And Eric Droveski is joining us from Liberty Mutual. So we're going to have three groups talking about the journey they've been on, how this has impacted their business, and hopefully give us a really good understanding of really what Kubernetes can do, how it changes the development process, how it changes operations, and we'll have a lot of time to take your questions at the end. So with that, we want to get started right away and turn it over to Arun. And oh, that's right, we're going to talk for just a minute about the acquisition before we jump into that. Sorry. The big news, obviously, for a lot of you coming to this is that Rancher is now part of SUSE. And this has been something we've been obviously announced back in the summertime. We've been working really closely as an organization to bring these two companies together. And now it's happened. We're officially finished. We've made that transition. This is a big moment for all of us that come from the Rancher Lab side. I was one of the founders at Rancher, and our team has been working on this open source project to build out Kubernetes management for more than 6 years now. With SUSE, we have found absolutely the perfect partner and home for our company. We are going to be bringing together two very strong open source organizations that have an understanding of building open source products and supporting those open source products for enterprise customers. SUSE has a long experience with cloud computing and their work in OpenStack and Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry. And so we really are excited about what this can mean. Over the next 3 to 4 months, we'll really be bringing together not just the engineering side of the organization, but also our support teams, our customer success teams, and our account management teams and services teams so that we really bring you a single integrated company by the time we are releasing, kind of working with you in 2021. And so it's an exciting time. We'll talk a lot about what it means from a product perspective in my session, but now I want to talk more about the industry and hand it over to Arun so he can talk about some of what they're seeing at Gartner in terms of how Kubernetes is growing and impacting organizations.
Hey, thanks, Shannon. Hi, everyone. My name is Arun. I primarily work with CIOs and CTOs and advise them, and I cover two areas within Gartner: cloud-native platforms and AI. Containers and Kubernetes are amongst the hardest technologies in the cloud computing space today. In this brief presentation, I'm going to talk about why and how IT leaders can really harness the value of these technologies. If you really take a step back and look at why containers and Kubernetes are hard today, it really boils down to the fact that every company on the planet is becoming a technology company or a software company. As Mark Andreessen wrote, close to a decade ago, software is still leading the world and is becoming the foundation for digital businesses. In particular, there are three patterns that we see that are really driving the interest in containers and Kubernetes today. The first really is the change in software application architectures, where more and more customers are looking to move away from traditional monolithic applications to more service-oriented application architectures. In particular, we're seeing a lot of interest in microservices architectures, and containers are a foundation of those microservices or even many services architectures. The second is really the rise of DevOps. There's a little bit of a chicken and egg when it comes to containers and DevOps, but we all can agree on the fact that containers allow developers and operations to come to the table with a common understanding, with a common abstraction on how to build portable and how to build agile applications. And finally, the container and Kubernetes ecosystem is underpinned by a very vibrant open source ecosystem that is supported by a broad set of commercial vendors, including vendors like Rancher. And when I look at the container adoption today, the container adoption has been rapidly growing in the last 5 to 7 years. So this is actually from a survey that we ran late last year. And what our customers are telling us, and I'm sure a number of you are customers as well, is customers are today running close to 2/3 of their workloads are roughly running in containerized environments, which is 2/3 of organizations are running containers either in test, dev, staging, or production environments. 1/3 of organizations are telling us that they're running containerized workloads in production. So that's really not a trivial number at this point in time. Kubernetes is pretty high in CIO priorities. We actually ran a survey earlier this year with our CIO audience, and Kubernetes was rated among number 5 of game-changing technologies that CIOs are looking at. While a lot of adoption and deployment of containers early on was for stateless use cases, we are starting to see a shift there as well. We are starting to see more interest in stateful workloads. Particularly, we are starting to see interest in more open source oriented stateful workloads that customers are running on containers. For example, PostgreSQL, MySQL, Mongo, Redis, Elasticsearch, Spark, Kafka are some of the fastest growing workloads, stateful workloads that customers are looking to run on containers and Kubernetes. And finally, while the adoption of containers today is roughly 1/3, in terms of production deployments in enterprise organizations, we think that number is going to significantly increase in the future. We think by 2025, greater than 80% of global organizations will be running containerized workloads in production. So we think the impact of containers and Kubernetes in the enterprises is going to be significantly high in the future. If you really take a step back and look at some of the benefits and challenges that containers and Kubernetes bring to enterprise IT leaders, what you can see here is the first and key benefit of containers is their ability to enable an agile CI/CD environment, which is the ability to do frequent application builds, the ability to do faster software releases, and more importantly, the ability to make granular changes into the operational environment and roll back the changes in case there are issues with it. The second is the environmental consistency that containers can bring in. Containers can significantly simplify the software development lifecycle because of their ability to package an application and all of its dependencies along with it, which is a huge benefit from a developer productivity standpoint. The third is really the concept of immutability. Now, what is immutability? Immutability is where customers are not making configuration changes or even patching into a containerized environment, which means that it can significantly reduce operational overheads and enhance security in the runtime environment. And finally, because of how pervasive Kubernetes have become today, customers have more flexibility and choice in terms of building more portable and more applications built on declarative APIs. Nevertheless, there are several challenges that customers have to navigate when they're deploying containers in Kubernetes in production. The first is platform complexity. Of course, Kubernetes has become a pretty stable project, but a lot of surrounding projects around Kubernetes that are required to be, running your workloads in production are still a little nascent in many cases, and that's a challenge that many customers have to navigate. The second is really around security. Organizations have to fundamentally rethink how they think about security, which is you cannot layer security as a product on top of your containerized environment. You have to really embed it as a process. We at Gartner, we call it DevSecOps, which is security becomes embedded as part of the DevOps process. And that calls for a very high degree of automation in the way you think about security and the way you think about governance. And finally, there are new skills that are required across the IT organization. There are new skills that are required on the development side. There are new skills that are required on the operation side. There are new skills that are required on the security side. The other point that I want to drive home here is the notion of culture and thinking a little differently, right? I think we spoke about DevOps and why DevOps is a prerequisite here. Another best practice that we see in organizations is their ability to create smaller and more independent teams, particularly more product-oriented teams that are able to take these technologies and able to build things faster because they are much more decentralized, and more importantly, they are empowered to make decisions in a much more faster way. How do you determine if you're ready to deploy Kubernetes and container workloads in production? The first question you should ask yourself is, have you identified the right use cases, the right workloads for containerization? I would typically advise customers who haven't started on the container journey to start with more stateless use cases, or to start with more simple applications. For example, applications that do not have a lot of dependencies, and applications that have smaller image sizes, so that you can really take advantage of the lightweightedness that containers can bring in. Secondly, make sure that you have a DevOps process and a DevOps practice in place, as you go down the path of containers in Kubernetes. Thirdly, you have to determine what use cases and what deployment models are going to be prominent within your organization. For example, are you going to deploy COTS applications on containers in Kubernetes, or if you're going to, rewrite custom applications, and if you're going to run them on containers in Kubernetes? And more importantly, if you're going to pursue a hybrid or a multi-cloud architecture, because a lot of these decisions weigh very heavily in terms of which vendor, for example, could be the right fit within your environment. Technology is always about a business value and business benefit, right? Which means that you need to understand what business value Kubernetes can bring into your organization, and more importantly, how you're going to measure it. Some of the most common metrics that we see in other organizations include developer productivity, that's often measured on a per developer, per application basis. The ability to do CI/CD, which is the ability to launch new features and new functionalities, and obviously what kind of a business benefit that results in. For example, better customer satisfaction or better top-line revenue growth. So you need to make sure that you're really tying your technology investments to a business value. We spoke about skills and how new skills are required. I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about new roles. Again, if you're doing more microservices oriented use cases, in organizations, you may have to create new roles. For example, roles such as build engineering or release engineering or site reliability engineers, or newer type of roles that organizations need to create to fully harness the value of your investments. And finally, containers and Kubernetes cannot run in a silo. They really have to be integrated with the rest of your infrastructure, and you need to have a very high degree of automation, whether that's your CI/CD pipeline, whether that's the way you provision and operate infrastructure, or whether that's the way you deploy security and monitoring tools along with your Kubernetes platform. Where do we see containers and Kubernetes heading from here? There are a few trends that are quite apparent to us at this point in time. The first is we are going to see an increasing support from third-party ISVs, which is more and more application software vendors and infrastructure software vendors will be rewriting their software to run on containers in the future and will support Kubernetes as an abstraction. We will be seeing more stateful workloads being deployed on Kubernetes in the future as well. We will also see more common management platforms, for managing containers and VMs together. We will also see more and more customers deploying containers in a serverless way. What I mean by that is they'll be using the containers and Kubernetes APIs on the front end, but they will really want to abstract the underlying provisioning and operations of the infrastructure underneath it. We will also see new types of VMs evolving, for containers. Today, more customers run containers in a VM, but they want much more lightweight as well as much more cheaper virtual machines in which they want to run containers in the future. And as I indicated earlier, we are seeing more and more customers go down the hybrid and to a lesser extent the multi-cloud route when they deploy containers. So the ability to provide a common management plane and a policy orchestration engine across hybrid and multi-cloud environments will be a key decision factor in the future. And finally, across a number of industries, including industrial companies, retail, media and entertainment, service providers, oil and gas, we are starting to see an increasing interest in edge and really deploying containers and more lightweight, Kubernetes type distributions in the edge environment to orchestrate and manage, both kind of IoT endpoints as well as edge applications that are being deployed there. So what actions should IT leaders be taking? The first thing is make sure that you have a strong business case, which is really understand how you're going to measure the value of your investments. Identify the right use cases and really start with simple use cases to start with. Make sure that you apply best practices, across security, across monitoring, across CI/CD, across networking, across storage, and so on and so forth as part of your strategy. Make sure that the Kubernetes platform vendor that you're choosing is really aligned with the type of application use cases you're going to deploy, as well as the multi-cloud or the multi-environment goals that you have. And finally, make sure that you have a more collaborative team between developers and operations to make sure that you're able to scale it effectively within your environment. There's plenty of research that's available on Gartner.com, and if you're a Gartner client, you are certainly welcome to get access to them. With that, I'll hand it back to the Rancher team.
Thanks, Arun. That was great, and really appreciate you sharing all of those insights and kind of talking about what's going on in the industry. Everyone, we have a questions tab here in GoToWebinar that gives you a great opportunity to ask questions as we're talking. We'll look at those questions as we go, and we'll try to answer them out back to the audience in the questions app, but some of them we'll take and we'll hold to the end. We might ask them to the panel, or we might ask them to Arun as we get into the Q&A session of this. But please don't hesitate to type down your questions and send them in that questions chat. With that, I want to talk a little bit about Rancher, and I'm super excited to be doing this. As you can imagine, it has been an incredible journey building Rancher from an idea into a company and then into a product that was just massively adopted in the community. And now bringing that into SUSE is an opportunity that is what you dream about when you start a company. And so what I thought I would try to do in the next 5 or 10 minutes is just to, for those of you who aren't familiar with Rancher, to help you understand a little bit about who we are, what we do, and how we came to the place we are today in the market. The reality is, Rancher is a massively successful open source product that is at the heart of how the world manages Kubernetes. We have more than 35,000 organizations using Rancher every day to manage their containers, their Kubernetes clusters, and we work with most of the world's biggest organizations on their strategy around doing this. If you imagine, we started working on Kubernetes and Docker and the container technology back in 2014, and now 6 years later, we have seen just an incredible transformation from, I remember reaching out to people and bringing this idea of containers to them and really having to educate people on why containers were important. Why would this packaging mechanism, this ability to take code and wrap it up in this new way, why would it have an impact? And then today, fast forward 6 years later, to see that having completely come to realization, seeing how organizations are using it and taking it into places that I never could have imagined. You're going to hear today stories about insurance companies and networking and telecommunications companies and manufacturing companies. But the reality is it's so broad. We work with companies in entertainment, we work with companies in finance, we work with companies that are small and companies that are big. And what's so great about the project is because it's open source, because anybody can pull down Rancher and then run it anywhere, its use cases are almost as broad as just the entire IT universe. We've been growing every year as a community by 200%, just doubling and doubling and doubling as more people find out about what this technology can do. They unlock the power of Kubernetes and they really get into doing it everywhere. We're doing that because of really 3 key things that we learned over time. The first is to build this type of technology, you have to embrace open source. Docker is open source technology. It's built on Linux. Kubernetes is open source technology. It's built on Docker. Rancher is open source technology. It's built on Kubernetes. And so you see the stack of technology as you come from Linux to containers and Docker to Kubernetes and orchestration to Rancher, this broad management platform that can manage Kubernetes everywhere. What was really important, though, is that by doing all that in open source, by making this technology open, we saw broad adoption, and we saw companies really open and comfortable using this technology broadly. And that has fueled so much of our growth. It fueled our business model. It fueled an approach that said, look, we're going to do everything in the open source space, and we're going to allow the community to contribute and participate. And what we'll get out of it will be a platform that everyone can participate in and own. The other big thing that we learned over the last 5 or 6 years is that, the industry needs standards. It needs to select technology and then rally around that technology and innovate on top of it. And for us, the moment where this market really changed and when we saw organizations feel more and more comfortable about investing is when Docker and Kubernetes became standards, and they saw that there would be consistent element in the ecosystem that they could then invest in and build on and trust to run their mission critical applications. And in the early days, that wasn't really obvious. There was a lot of competing projects that were trying to become the orchestration mechanism for containers, and very good ones, projects that had a lot of merit behind them. But the market definitely benefited from a standardization, because once we were able to standardize on something like Kubernetes, all of a sudden you started to unlock the potential of computing everywhere. And when you imagine Kubernetes being able to run in the data center, but also in lots of other types of places, you then can imagine, what about technology around that? How do we solve storage? Arun talked about persistent apps. How do you solve that in a way that works the same in one cluster and another cluster? And luckily, we had, with Kubernetes, we also had the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which I'm a member of and on the board of. And the CNCF gave us standards, and we were able to say, this is what it means to conform to a standard for Kubernetes. So we now have the standard that we can build technology around and build technology upon that is just unlike anything we've ever had. We don't have that in virtualization, right? We don't have that in cloud computing. We don't have a standard mechanism that we can use like we do with Linux. Now we have that with Kubernetes. And this is where there's just enormous potential unlocked. Because of all that, what we realized as a company was that if we built on top of those things and we innovated in a way that actually addressed the problems people are having putting this technology into place, we'd be able to build both a really successful project, but also a company that could grow. And that was really our goal with Rancher, was to take these fundamental technologies like Docker, like Kubernetes, and really implement them in a real world in a way that organizations could rapidly adopt, incorporate into their IT processes, and scale, and do all that with security in mind. Because what's happening is there is real pressure in the market to leverage this to be more competitive, right? At the end of the day, we're all trying to solve the business problems that Arun talked about. The real mission that we're in right now is how to take these successes that we're finding with Kubernetes and with containers and with DevOps and DevSecOps and begin to move it broader, to move away from kind of innovating on a specific project or a specific application stack that we're building, and to start standardizing on innovation and really standardizing on these new models and applying them to all of our lines of business. So moving from not just innovating in the cloud, but innovating in the data center, not just innovating in the data center and in the application IT side, but also looking at what our organization's OT looks like. What does it look like in factories, in stores, in networks, on the edge? And what's great is with Kubernetes, we have distributions and builds that allow us to run this same capability everywhere. If you jump to the next slide, Connie, what we're imagining now is this universe where, with one common standard of Kubernetes running on the laptop and in the data center and in the cloud and in factories and even in devices, medical devices, and you know, even cars. We're now seeing, you know, this stack, this Linux, Docker, Kubernetes stack existing as an element. And what that means is, unlike the original idea of Kubernetes, if you kind of go back to Google's idea when they built Kubernetes, you know, a lot of it was derived from Borg, this idea of massive clusters that were going to be really efficient, that you would sort of run a small number of. We're actually seeing the reality is quite different, that we have a broad number of clusters. We have clusters in the cloud, we have clusters in the data center, and they're often created and even somewhat ephemeral, that a cluster can be created to run a project, to do HPC on something, and then disappear. You know, these days we're working with a lot of the largest pharmaceutical companies on research and work they're doing around COVID, actually. And so much of that is project work that needs to scale really large and then collapse back down at a given time. And so we have many clusters running in many places, and that's really where Rancher has come in, is this centralized management product that allows you to not use Kubernetes as kind of a point solution for a specific problem, but rather to embrace Kubernetes running everywhere. So our stack really starts with the idea of deploying Kubernetes in your data centers or in your edge locations, but also consuming Kubernetes that exists out there. You know, in the cloud today, you can get a Kubernetes cluster as easily as you can get a VM. And so we're living in a world where there's much less difficulty creating clusters. Where the challenge comes in is in, how do I operate all these clusters? How do I build policy? How do I develop a set of rules for how my different teams can interface with it? And then how, once I have those policies and I know who's going to be accessing these clusters, and know, you know, what's allowed to be done on the clusters, and I can incorporate sort of global security and operational policies, how do I then enable the teams to use it? Because what we want to get to is an IT organization who sees Kubernetes as almost the next cloud, right? A platform that is, by its nature, distributed, by its nature runs in different infrastructure, can run in multi-cloud, can run on-premise, can run in the edge, and yet gives a common set of capabilities, a common approach to security, a common approach to networking, a common approach to storage, a common approach to application deployments and operations and scaling. So from an IT organization, you know, they have a more consistent platform. We're not switching context so much. Then when we hand that over to the development organizations and the application teams, they also can develop with a common set of tools that work, you know, in their lab, in their test environments, on their laptops, and then can easily be part of a DevOps process to push out into production. So there's an enormous amount of benefit from this standardization. And what I want to do now is I want to turn it over to Eamon so that he can take a minute and show you what this looks like. What does it look like for a product like Rancher to manage clusters running in lots of different places, to build clusters, to set policy? So Eamon, do you mind jumping in and going through a demo of Rancher and kind of giving a really high level overview of what it can do?
Absolutely, happy to do so. Let me get my screen shared here and we'll kick it off. So that introduction is perfect, obviously, and it ties well into the flow I have for the demonstration today. We start on this interface with Rancher, and this is where we get the first idea that Rancher is a product meant for managing multiple Kubernetes clusters. So on this page, you can see that I have multiple clusters joined to this Rancher instance, but more so, I have clusters joined from a wide variety of providers. You can see under the provider column in the section there that I have clusters that are running in Amazon EC2, I have custom clusters, I have K3s at the edge clusters, and even an imported Kubernetes cluster in this Rancher environment. If we click on the Add Cluster button here in the upper right, we can visualize the different ways that Rancher has for importing, creating, or managing different types of Kubernetes clusters. At the top, we have register an existing Kubernetes cluster, and the options here are available for situations where you have an existing CNCF certified Kubernetes cluster and you'd like to bring that cluster under the Rancher umbrella for its management capabilities. You also see an Amazon EKS option there, and that's indicative of work that we're doing with hosted Kubernetes providers to provide Rancher users the ability to import those clusters into Rancher, but still retain lifecycle management over the Kubernetes experience. So that would be things like upgrading the Kubernetes cluster, adding and removing nodes, operational lifecycle concerns for the hosted provider. Under these sections here with create a new Kubernetes cluster, this is where Rancher's provisioning capabilities come in. With existing node options and infrastructure provider options here, Rancher can be leveraged to stand up a new Kubernetes cluster either on existing nodes that are already provisioned in your infrastructure, or using the hosted options there, infrastructure that you will have Rancher perform the provisioning actions upon. EC2, Azure, DigitalOcean, as you can see, are all providers listed there. And of course, on-premises options such as OpenStack and vSphere are available as infrastructure providers as well. Finally, towards the bottom of the page, with a hosted Kubernetes provider in this section here, we can leverage Rancher's management capabilities and its provisioning capabilities to set up Kubernetes clusters in any of the hosted environments. Obviously, the big three are listed there: Amazon, Azure, Google. We also have drivers available for Oracle and other hosted Kubernetes providers. Naturally, the progression after setting up a Kubernetes cluster is to begin the discussion around security. Now that I've got a slate of Kubernetes clusters, how do I give access to my users? How do I ensure that these Kubernetes clusters are run in a secure and compliant manner? Under the security dropdown here, there are several different menu items we can go through, but to give you a high-level overview, with authentication sections listed under here, I have the ability to tie in Rancher to almost any enterprise IDP out there. Obviously, Active Directory, Azure AD, big components in enterprise organizations, but other authentication drivers exist for things like LDAP, FreeIPA, and so on. Once we've set up authentication, then Rancher gives us the ability to centrally manage RBAC policies. With role-based access control and Rancher's manageability of said RBAC policies, I can create RBAC templates at a global level and reuse those templates for any of the Kubernetes clusters that I have joined to my Rancher instance. This helps streamline security operations by not requiring me to go through the boilerplate work of setting up RBAC policies in each cluster. I need only do it once at the global level and replicate all that work down to my Kubernetes clusters. Continuing the conversation about security, you also see pod security policies listed here. Rancher has management of pod security policies also at the global level, so I can create a set of security policy templates and apply those to my Kubernetes clusters, ensuring that all of my clusters are compliant in a uniform way, and I can retain central management of that. Finally, on the security components, OPA, and I've just switched tabs here. Let me explain what I've done. Rancher has a next generation dashboard, which you're seeing here right now, and this is our new home for all features inside the Rancher platform. I switched here to offer a discussion about OPA Gatekeeper. Rancher has incorporated the Open Policy Agent Gatekeeper component into the Rancher platform, and we use this and have this as an offering inside the platform for administrators to set up constraints and templates to ensure that there is policy-based enforcement across all of the Kubernetes clusters being managed by Rancher. In this new dashboard, you see the direct experience that a Kubernetes administrator would have with managing a Rancher-managed Kubernetes cluster. On the left-hand side of the page, Rancher offers visibility for all of the different resources that are running inside your Kubernetes cluster. I can control my workloads, manage service discovery options, configure storage, RBAC policies, secrets, configuration maps. Any Kubernetes component is visible and manageable inside this dashboard. Furthermore, any custom resources that you install into the cluster, such as a Kubernetes operator or some other custom piece of integration, will have their resources visualized in this dashboard and available for administrators and developers alike to manage and configure those resources. Under this dropdown here in the upper left, we see a full slate of options that Rancher has for day 2 functionality. All of this starts from the Apps and Marketplace section. Clicking into the Apps and Marketplace section takes me to Rancher's Apps functionality. This is a great user interface for installing not only Rancher Day 2 features, but any Helm chart application, the organizations or third party that you wish to install into your Kubernetes cluster. Easy enough to walk through and click through a couple of visual options to install any application that you have set up as a catalog inside your Rancher instance. This is a great way to bridge the divide between development and operations folks, where developers may take their application, publish it as a Helm chart, and operations folks can consume that Helm chart and deploy it out onto a Kubernetes cluster, oftentimes without needing to know the minutia of the functionality of the application. As I said earlier, this is also our home for installing Rancher's Day 2 functionality. So you can see components here like monitoring, OPA Gatekeeper, which we talked about earlier, logging, Istio functionality, all of these things, CIS benchmark scanning, which I will touch on. We didn't, all of these are installed from this Apps and Marketplace section. Under the dropdown here, you see all of those Day 2 bits of functionality added. For Istio, Rancher offers the ability to install the Istio service mesh into any of your Rancher managed Kubernetes clusters, and then Rancher extends its functionality to offer management of Istio resources, including visualization with Kiali, creating resources such as destination rules, virtual services, and anything else necessary for the service mesh to function. Our Day 2 logging feature is a simple way to set up centralized logging for your Kubernetes cluster. When you deploy our logging feature, we set up FluentD and FluentBit on all of your Kubernetes nodes and collect logs from all of the containers running inside the cluster. It is then simple to take those logs and forward them to one or more destinations, such as Elasticsearch, Kafka, Splunk, and have those logs centrally aggregated into your organization's existing log aggregation infrastructure. With the monitoring section, Rancher has the capability of deploying Prometheus and Grafana into a Kubernetes cluster. Rancher will take the steps of setting up all of the metrics collection as part of Prometheus and also wiring up visualizations within Grafana. This means you have a 1, maybe 2 or 3 click option for setting up enterprise-grade monitoring within your Kubernetes cluster. We can see extreme details such as network traffic performance, bandwidth, all sorts of different options on the nodes and within container performance. I touched on OPA Gatekeeper before. I'd like to add one more thing to the security component of our conversation, which is CIS benchmark scanning. This is a feature inside the Rancher platform that integrates Aqua Security's great KubeBench tool and makes it available for scanning any Kubernetes cluster for adherence to the Center for Internet Security's CIS benchmark scans. Different profiles are available for hosted Kubernetes providers, Rancher-specific Kubernetes installations, and any imported Kubernetes cluster. Finally, in our conversation, I want to touch on the idea of continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is the name in the Rancher platform for a technology from Rancher Labs called Fleet. This is Rancher's GitOps at scale. We can take any number of Git repositories, including resources in those repositories, such as Helm charts, YAML manifests, customized overlays, and have those resources deployed to any number of clusters. Internally, we've tested the Fleet functionality up to the millions of clusters, so we're confident it's prepared for any scale you're able to throw at it. With those Git repositories, then, I can target one or more clusters as a destination for my resources, or via the cluster groups option, I can take my cluster groups targeting one or more Kubernetes clusters and ensure that my resources are appropriately deployed and always in a synchronized state for any of the Kubernetes clusters that I have joined to Rancher and this continuous delivery functionality. That's what I have to offer today. Shannon, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eamon. Thanks for compressing that, what I know usually takes 30 minutes, 40 minutes down into kind of a quick overview, and I appreciate that. All right, so talked a little bit about the journey we've been on at Rancher and what's happening in the broader market. But I think what's most valuable is to really look at individual companies and kind of understand what those journeys have been like. So for the last 20 to 30 minutes of this session, we want to kind of shift and turn the microphone over to some fantastic people who have been individually working on this, for some time, 4 or 5 years in most cases. So first up is Stefan from Continental. Stefan, you ready to go?
Yep. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you. My name is Stefan. I'm working at Continental. We are one of the biggest automotive supplier. We are a manufacturing company, but moving towards also a software company when it comes to mobility service, when it comes to autonomous driving. So just round about some figures about the company. We are located in 595 location in 59 countries. It's about how we are organized and that you have a better understanding where we are working. So we are divided in different areas, and I'm working in the area automotive technology. This is dealing with autonomous mobility and vehicle networking. We are doing manufacturing IT, and this is what I will talk about today. So that's a comprehensive picture. So that's what we are doing. We call it edge to cloud environment, manufacturing application infrastructure. We deal with the things that are really located on the shop floor, the edge devices on the shop floor. Then when we have infrastructure, the data centers in the location on plant level, but we are also running services in the cloud. In 2020, we focused on the plant level. So we focused on the infrastructure that is located in the manufacturing facility, and we implemented Kubernetes there. So finally, manufacturing application infrastructure, what it's all about. First of all, some principles. So we do an architecture transformation instead of a replacement. So we do not really start from scratch. So we have software already running, and we do the transformation of that software and adding new functionality there by containerization. What we also have as a principle, we do online production control. So we control our manufacturing facilities, and this is why we decided to do that within the local data centers, not running all these services in the cloud. Cloud native, cloud agnostic, this is something that's very important for us. That's also a reason why we then finally also decided for Rancher that we say, okay, we want to have an environment that we want to be independent of cloud providers. We want to use the same technology. We want to have cloud native technology, but we want to run these technologies how we want to run it, and not driven by the cloud providers. And what is important for us, and that's also one reason for really going with Rancher, is a global multi-cluster environment. And this is what this picture you see here. So we have around about 45 manufacturing location where we install that platform. We have 3 regions, and with these 3 regions, we have so-called management servers or management environments. We then control all these manufacturing facilities, and in each of these manufacturing facility, we have 1 or even more clusters, Kubernetes clusters, where we then deploy our manufacturing applications. In 2020, we already rolled out the platform to 27 locations, and then we will further do the rollout in 2021 to finally 45 locations. Just round about some figures about the scope. So we're talking about 50,000 production stations and more than 1,000 different services. For sure, the services are not all transformed in 2020, so this transformation is ongoing within the next, what we assume, that 5 years. The next level for us is then going to the edge devices. So when we talk about edge devices, we think we will have then finally about 200 to 400,000 edge devices within the next 2 and 3 years. And this is also something what we want to do with a containerized environment. To the timeline, we started in 2018, we did the kickoff there, and then finally a vendor selection. And in 2019, we focused on the architecture and the development of the first solutions. And then in 2020, together with the company Rancher, we did a very successful rollout, and we started with the service, mentioned these 27 locations. So at the beginning, we thought we will start with 12, 14 location maximum, but at the end, we were able to really roll it out to already 27. And as I mentioned, in 2021, we really want to focus on the further rollout, but then doing the things also on the edge devices, because I think the real benefit then also with Kubernetes is really doing that also on the edge devices. That's my content, I think.
Awesome. Stefan, thank you for sharing so much about it, and we'll hold the questions until we get to the panel section. But next up is Brad Linder from Dish Network. And Brad, do you want to take it away?
We're going to run just real quick some background on me. I've done a little bit of everything, right? I've sort of been playing with clouds and digital transformations and DevOps, and pick your buzzword here for the past 6 or so years. It's been fun to watch, right? And one thing I'll offer to anyone listening, I'm happy to help, right? My contact info is below. Reach out. It's one of the things that bring me joy, right? I've fought many wars and have the scars to prove them, and I'd love to help you on your journey if you'd like. Getting into Dish in the next slide, I think it's important to kind of paint a picture of sort of where we are as an organization, right? Some people may know Dish, some people may not. Traditionally, we've been a satellite television provider, right? The two sort of mid-range businesses that we have are OnTech and Sling. Sling is TV over the internet, so we've transformed to be the first live TV provider. And our OnTech services are smart home in tech, folks doing things in homes, businesses. The future for Dish is wireless, right? We are in the midst of a build out of a 5G cloud native network, right? So that means we're going to take the traditional telco space, turn it on its head, and we're going to run a 5G network in Kubernetes in the cloud, and probably 15, 20,000 different data centers. And I use that term lightly, right? Because this could be a cabinet at the base of a tower. We kind of we've had a very interesting journey, I guess, is the real message, right? This started back in 2016, right? That's when I met the great folks over at Rancher to help us, sort of figure out some things, right? 2016 was about strategy and POC for us, right? Trying to get things figured out. 27 into 2018 was really about building, right? And really what we did was build a web scale cloud native middleware, right? And what does that really mean? We'll get into some metrics in the next slide, but this is a hybrid cloud, AWS and on-prem and VMware environment that we are running. We're running some pretty big volumes through some of these things, right? As 2019 came, right, this was really about hardening, right? And I guess the one bit of advice I'd give everybody is, the people side of this is harder than the technology side of this, right? You have to keep your folks in mind, right? Make sure they have the support, they have the training, they have the right partners to be able to do some of these things, and bring in some folks who can kind of help, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to go find all of these people that know all of these things, right? You have to train the folks that you have, right? So please keep that in mind as you go through it. But as far as the Kubernetes journey across Dish, there's two main dimensions. As I mentioned, Sling, that we were kind of first to market with the Kubernetes efforts and strategies. And what that Sling middleware does is it auto scales, right? And we have, about 2.5 million customers right now for Sling. And if you think about when folks typically watch TV is when you come home, right? It's a US only product. So as folks come home from work, you can see traffic go through the roof, right? And what we have to do is be able to keep up with that sort of change. We built up some predictive models to do some auto scaling stuff, which is really interesting. At this point on the Sling estate, what we're really doing is, we've taken a continuous improvement base model to evolve our product, right? Because things are going to change. There's certain things you can't do in a lab when you're dealing with web scale, right? And that's the way we've taken with Sling, is to really iterate and evolve those things. On the Dish side, they were actually traditionally using the 1.6 cattle product from Rancher, and they're in the midst of their migration over to Rancher 2 and Kubernetes, and that's going really well. They have about 85–90% done with that transformation, and they'll keep evolving that. Right now, the COE at the bottom, right? Again, going back to the businesses, right? If you think about what we're doing, is we're trying to productize a platform, right? And a platform might be Kubernetes, it might be AWS, it might be GCP, it might be an engineering tool or a process, right? We're trying to get those things wrapped up, delivered at scale, right? That's where Fleet comes in, right? To be able to say, here is a declarative image of what we want the world to look like. Please make it so, right? And I guess to wrap up with some metrics, we've had a lot of success, knock on wood, right? It's been really cool to watch, right? 8 billion calls a day, with 3 nines most of the time. Again, knock on wood. Hope I didn't just jinx us. It's been really cool to watch, right? We've also built in a continuous deployment component to that Sling middleware, right? Deployments go as they need to, right? You commit to master, it goes, right? We have the right testing and infrastructure to support it. Auto scaling is actually predictive, right? It's not factored in with this increase, but now if something happens, right? Somebody releases an unplanned feature into the wild and we have to auto scale our way out of it, the system will just do it, right? It's been fantastic to watch. And we've saved a lot of cost from an infrastructure perspective as well. The SRE has been a great way to bring the teams together, right? I'd highly encourage that from folks to really get into that, right? Drive by data, right? Observability, right? If a tree falls in the woods, you have to hear it, or it doesn't matter, right? So building observability in from the beginning, and automate the mundane, right? That's the toil, right? You want to get those things to the point where you have an automated solution for it. And then finally, build products, not projects, right? Projects come, oh, I'm going to do this in 2 weeks. No, I'm going to have release 1 in 2 weeks, and we're going to continually evolve it and improve it, right? It comes from the way you implement it. It comes from the way you roll it out to your folks, and it really lets you get to the places that you probably want to go. So that was my bit. Hopefully that was helpful. And like I said, please reach out if I can help. I'd love to help you all on your journey.
Thank you so much. That was great. Really appreciate you sharing the story. Okay, Eric, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Shannon. And for those that don't know me out there, my name's Eric Robozeski. I'm a senior architect at Liberty Mutual Insurance. I'll start giving a little background on Liberty Mutual and kind of what our history is as a 108-year-old company in the insurance industry. So at Liberty Mutual, we're a really large, global, diversified insurer. We're the 6th largest property and casualty insurer in the United States, and we employ roughly 45,000 people across the globe. One of our core values at Liberty Mutual is really to help people preserve and protect what they earn, build, own, and cherish. So your automobiles, your houses, your boats, your ATVs, any of those types of things, those assets that are really valuable, helping you insure those things so that you can really move forward with your life and make sure that when protection's needed and things are there, that we're there best to serve you. Our operations are global. We're committed to providing those products and services to meet those needs, whether it's families, businesses, individuals, what have you. And at the same time, really providing a great dynamic and diverse work environment for our employees and supporting our communities as well through some great community outreach programs. So with what we've been focused on at Liberty Mutual, we found back in the 2015 timeframe that containers and Kubernetes was really going to be a foundational technology for us. And as important as some of that was, I think the key ingredient for us was the culture that we created throughout that. So what we did was really embark on an agile transformation as well that kind of brought our culture forward, brought our DevOps tool sets forward, and met our people, our employees, where they needed to be met so that we could move forward together in this journey. So as we kind of started in that 2016 timeframe, there was a huge emphasis focused on continuous learning and enablement of our team. So that was a big piece of this. And it was interesting when we started exploring things, because we started really early in the 2016 timeframe with Kubernetes. And it had a lot of challenges, I must say, at that time for us, where we started to push the limits on things. The technology was still early days, and we found out a lot of things the hard way, I'd say. And as we kind of did that at the same time, it became evident to, I think, everyone in our company in the technology sector thinking about this, where there was a lot of opportunity. So a lot of use cases really started to emerge for us. And we kind of sought out something simpler. So for us, we stumbled onto Docker Swarm, and it was kind of like, well, this thing just kind of works, right? And it was a great, interesting tool to deliver a model where Swarm natively encrypted traffic and allowed a compose-driven model for developers that was quite simple and easy to understand. And before we knew it, that got us off to just a ridiculous scale, in my opinion, where within a year and a half, we were running 10,000 containers in production. And that scaled all lines of business. We were running many different types of workloads in there. App modernization was a big key for us, where we have a lot of traditional workloads that are moving to the cloud and being rewritten, refactored, replatformed, and containers became a great avenue for that in terms of providing value in the continuous delivery aspect back to our dev teams to accelerate things. So we quickly, scaled massively to all these workloads running across the globe. And at the same time, there were some challenges that we saw in terms of our ability to maintain reliability of these clusters at that level of scale. And that's when we really started to kind of think back to, what Kubernetes was good at, what it was kind of anchored on, and also the maturity the project had reached at the time. And that was in the kind of 2018 timeframe, working with the Rancher team. We kind of started to bring back our vision of what Kubernetes was going to mean for Liberty Mutual, and really started to embrace that as our core infrastructure fabric for the future. And that has been a great accomplishment that our teams have made here just over the last year and a half, and bringing a really great developer-focused experience together for Kubernetes workloads, that we can maintain the simplicity of the dev experience similar to what they had with Compose, without having to have all our developers understand all of the inherent complexity below the Kubernetes API. So our goal is to let Kubernetes be the API that manages and abstracts infrastructure at scale, but let it be the platform that extends in terms of other products and capabilities that make our developers most productive across our lines of business. So that's really where our future is, where we're focused now on building a collective set of scale to zero capabilities that we look at it for all of our dev teams. So whether that's the serverless models, the platform as a service model, machine learning workflows, those are really what we're focused on now. And using that Kubernetes declarative API as the common substrate for what infrastructure is. So whether we're in our private data centers, whether we're in public cloud or multiple public clouds, or in the future edge-based capabilities, Kubernetes is going to become that common dial tone for us for infrastructure. We can use that to really mask a lot of the undifferentiating work at an infrastructure plumbing level and focus on differentiation at that higher platform level, and where those workloads and our business needs us to accelerate digital capabilities for the future. So that's really where we're at. And what we're finding, I think, now is that the consistency that we can gain out of platforms like Kubernetes across a broad set of cloud infrastructure is a great asset when we think about doing this at scale and doing this at global scale. And that's it, Shannon. Can jump back to you.
I love that slide, Eric. It's such a perfect encapsulation of, you know, this effort that people are going through to standardize and to develop a consistent experience. Well, I can't believe it. We got through all of that content, all of those presenters on the money. We are done, you know, 1 hour in, and we are actually at the point where we can kind of talk and ask questions. I really want to first, you know, for those of you who have to leave, you know, we're going to record the rest of this session. You're welcome to come back and listen to some of the Q&A, listen to some of the panel session when at your convenience. But what we're going to do now is really take a second to go through and ask a few questions of our presenters, and hopefully, you know, bring your questions back to the conversation. So if you have been seeing, we've been answering questions on the questions tab as you've asked them. Sometimes we'll share those back out to the broader audience. But certainly Eric, Stefan, Brad, Arun, if you're still with us, please turn on, you know, feel free to turn on your video, and I've got a couple questions to get us kicked off. And then as we see questions come in from the audience, we'll turn on more of them. But maybe I can start with Brad. You kind of talked about the journey you've been on and the broader sort of challenge. What I wanted to ask about is the team, and I know a little bit about your team because we've known each other for 5 years. But I would, if you wouldn't mind, can you talk to me a little bit about the team you built, what kind of skills you needed, what were some of the key hires? Did you work with any external consultancies that were really important? Because this isn't a one-person job. This is a transformation, and it brings a lot of people together. And you've done an amazing job bringing that team together at Dish and Sling. So we'd love to just hear a little bit more about the team of talent you needed around you to succeed.
Sure. Well, first, I agree. It takes a village, right? No question there, right? This isn't you know, a one-man hero show by any stretch of the imagination. When we started, we kind of had a combination. I called it the tripod, right? When we started, right? I had a platform engineering team, and those folks were responsible for building just what it sounds like, you know, building out Kubernetes, CI/CD engineering tools, right, to really help folks. I also had that middleware team that reported up into me that made things a little easier, right, for the transformation, right? It's, you know, Conway's law is real, right? It's about getting folks to align around those things, right? And the third part is I had a big data organization that was, I kind of called them Big Brother, right, lovingly, right? Part of my big data team. But they were there to kind of give us some metrics and some data so you can actually transform the way you make a decision, right? Years past, it's always been who's got the biggest title and the biggest mouth, right? That's how you made a decision in a lot of companies, right? I found out a lot of folks. But you have to flip that on its head and say, here's the data that says this works or it doesn't, right? Whether that's a platform service, I'm running scale Kubernetes, or that's a customer feature, right? Modern product engineering is about taking data, it's about taking the voice of the customers, internal and external, wrapping a bow around it and giving yourself a product that can help you make your business better, right? But we've had mixes, right? We didn't really go to market to go find a whole bunch of consultants. I would urge caution for anybody who's thinking about doing that. Not all consultancies are made equal, for sure. We'll say that as well. But it does help to have that person who knows what good looks like, right? And good, there's ways to do things right, but it has to be, I call it getting your fingerprints on it, right? You really have to get your organizational culture, your folks to understand it and embrace it, to really understand it. There's a couple ways to do it right. There's lots of ways to do it wrong, but don't just take the word of somebody who says, I've been there, done that. I'm smart, you should listen.
Excellent. Brad, thank you for that. Anyone else want to add a little bit more to that about the team and the types of talent you maybe needed, found difficult to find? I know for a lot of the people on this call, the first step in trying to accomplish this is figuring out who to kind of bring to the org that can help them make this journey a reality.
Yeah, so what we realized, so in the beginning, we started really with training. So really training the internal people that you get the appropriate skills to really start the journey. And then what we realized that we have to involve in our area, manufacturing area, there are three different groups. One is related to the developers, application developers. The second one is related to the infrastructure. And there is a lot of legacy infrastructure when it comes to manufacturing, involving these people, convincing people going into these new areas using these new technologies, because a lot of these software is built on platforms that are running for 15 years, 10 years. And the third one is coming to the local team. So when it comes to manufacturing facility, that you involve the people who are really operational running the services. So, and they are located, in our case, in the location. And if we involved all these three areas and really ramped up the skills, and that really helped us to not only convincing, but also being successful running the new services on Kubernetes instead of VMs or server environments.
Yeah. Shannon, this is Arun here. I'll quickly make a couple of points, and I don't want to repeat what others have said, but there are two common mistakes that I've seen, when I talk to customers, right? First is people tend to underestimate the amount of training that's required upfront, and they end up spending much less on training and much more on other things, and then they kind of rue that decision. The other thing that I want to say here is there is often a lot of confusion on who does what in this environment. We kind of talk about DevOps, we talk about this being a collaborative effort, but you really need to be clear on roles and responsibilities across the organization. Almost think of it like having a RACI chart in terms of having a very clear assigned responsibility and accountability across different teams for you to be successful. And that's definitely a best practice that I would advise to customers.
That's great, Arun.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Shannon, on that one. I think one of the things we found was the same, is that you can't underestimate the amount needed to kind of move your culture and your workforce forward to really enable this. And one of the things we did was, it wasn't traditional training models. I want to be clear on that. It wasn't send a bunch of people to training classes and let them attend and listen to instructors and those things. It was more immersive experiences that we created, and also programs where we offered our employees to go and study, go out to these coding schools, go embed yourself for 3 months, 6 months, these programs where we allowed our employees to do that. And it was all in the construct of, we're becoming more of a software-driven company. Digital experiences are the key. And I think we found that kind of really just a great intersection of this with like agile culture kind of forming, this continual learning culture we were building, and then the technology transformation was happening, just fit in really, really nicely. So that was a huge component for us in terms of how we were able to do it, I think maybe more quickly than some others. So it was great to see that happen.
It's so true. The team side, though, I always feel like this is the part people a little bit underestimate is, the technology is a part of it, but it's the team and the process and sort of the commitment of the organization to go on this journey. And I kind of want to talk a little bit there, because all three of you that are coming out of industry, I think you all have backgrounds on the operational side, like more IT operations than particularly being developers. And I'm curious, what were some of the challenges you ran into, kind of bringing together the application owners, the developers who were responsible for those line of business functions with the operational side of building a platform and building a really almost a cloud, right? Building this like new container cloud. What were some of the challenges of bringing developers to the platforms you built, or maybe getting your team to understand their requirements? And maybe for this one, Stefan, if you don't mind, kind of, I know for you guys that you really are very close to the application development teams because you're dealing with people building specific apps for the factories where you're going to be running this, but you're still dealing with two groups of people with very different mindsets at times, and also a different comfort level with some of these DevOps principles and things like containers and Kubernetes. Was that an area you ran into challenges? Was that an area that you felt like there was really good alignment? What happened there?
In the beginning, that's really a big challenge, and it was about really also breaking down the barriers between the different line organization. When it comes to a big company like Continental, and you talk about infrastructure people and competency center people, and the one they're creating the software, the other one providing the infrastructure, they are somehow quite separated. So we are delivering this infrastructure, and what you run, this is your story, and you have to deal with that. And this does not work in a containerized environment. This does not work with Kubernetes anymore. So this DevOps approach that you really need to work very, very closely together, this is absolutely necessary. What we did also in parallel to really changing the architecture, also we changed also the process how we create this solution, and we using an agile framework that is called SAFe. So and with this agile framework, we are combining people from different line organization in agile teams, having a product owner, having a scrum master, and these agile teams, they are running in parallel, and they're working on the same backlog, and they're providing functionality all together. And these kind of events, this is a kind of cadence what we have every 10 weeks. We create things, we demonstrate the results in a system demonstration event all together, and about 80 people are joining these sessions when we do the planning of the 10 weeks, and when we also do the system demonstration of that, what we achieved. And that really brings the people together, coming from different organization in a big company, but also what was really helpful, and now with these COVID times, bringing people together, sitting in different locations, sitting at home, and they are feeling that as one team working on the same story. And the infrastructure people, they were part of it. And the people who are really on the operational side, they were part of it, and they are part of it. And that was important for us.
Anyone else want to add anything to that about the relationship? Eric, I know you guys, this was a big investment of kind of bringing the two teams together. And this is one thing I've heard over and over again, is that for a lot of organizations, DevOps kind of started with cloud, right? The beginning of applications being developed more on cloud, more kind of embracing CI/CD, but that containers and Kubernetes have been like, adding enormous amount of fuel to this fire of DevOps and driving a big acceleration there. So curious if there's anything you can talk to on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, Shannon, similar to what Stefan talked about, was using the agile models. We've used things like scaled agile to certain degrees, and I think like with that, like what it does is it started to break down some traditional barriers between the development teams and the infrastructure teams, and started to really bring people more together and get buy-in, from the top levels of the organizations down all the way down to the lowest levels in the engineering teams, to really talk openly about what we needed, what were the outcomes we were trying to drive for. And you look at now at our journey in hindsight, over the last 5 years, and what we've got today is essentially some really high trust partnerships, where it used to be a lot of request-driven workflows and things where there were so many handoffs and delays. Things are now happening real time. Teams trust each other, they're enabled, and they're empowered to go and do what they need to do to actually deliver these outcomes, it's amazing progress. And I feel like it's that combination of kind of the technology, the people, and the process to create this new agile culture that has just been, it's tremendous when you look at how far we've come. And now these teams are able to actually, they're advocating for each other. They're out there saying all these great things about the success stories and the speed and the agility that they're able to get to now. It's incredible to see. So really really great progress in terms of what we're seeing. But I think on the outcome side, that's what we're getting to now with kind of how we're working and how much that's evolved. It's pretty incredible.
That's awesome. One kind of more question on this. You guys led projects to make this happen inside of your organizations. One of the hard parts sometimes for enabling this change is getting budget, getting sort of management buy-in to the program. How did you go about that? Could you leverage existing budgets? Was this a multi-million-dollar transformation that you needed to go and build a big project and a project budget for? Did you do this out of your existing runtime budget and just transform as you went and kind of find a way? How did you pay for all that training and buy new tools and sort of implement, hire new people? Like, all that requires dollars or some way of getting it there. And I think it's an important thing for people to think about, because it's never just technology, it's process and people and all these other things that get onto it. So I'm curious, I think it's an important question. Maybe Brad, if you don't mind talking about it from your perspective at Sling, what did you have to do to bring the resources together to make this transformation happen?
Absolutely. I totally agree. The people part of this is hard, right? I got people skills. I work with the people, right? I mean, go back code office space, right? It's legit, right? But as far as the budget goes, you have to tie it to an outcome, right? You're not here. I'm not here to implement Kubernetes. What does the business know or care about Kubernetes? They care about a business outcome, right? We are here to bring a feature to market, to whoop our competition, right? And that's really what we did. Looking at the Sling estate, going back to our first project or program for this, it was, okay, well, we have to go build a web scale middleware. And these are the things that go into that, right? This isn't something we're going to build in 2 weeks, right? This is going to change the way that we work. This is going to change all the technologies that we use. And here's what's required, right? Don't underestimate that. It's you have to tell the story. But if you don't link it to an outcome, you're going to get people, deer in headlights looking at you going, speak English or speak the language of that I understand, because I don't know what Kubernetes or containers or CI/CD or, fill in your buzzword here, right? It's really about saying, you want to do this, right? Here's how we do that, right? And here's what it takes, right? And if you need help figuring out what it takes, that's the place where it might make sense to have somebody help you, right? Whether it's the open source community, whether that's a consultant that you bring in. But again, remember, and tie it to a business outcome that means something, and get your fingerprints on it, or you're not gonna be successful.
A great answer, Brad. Spot on. Anyone else want to add on that? And some of the challenges you ran into getting the resources to go and do this transformation.
In our case, when it comes to manufacturing, it was maybe not that difficult, because really that was already a board decision really with Industry 4.0 to really do a transformation for the manufacturing world, and that's not only because of the IT part, it's also related to things that we run on the shop floor what never run before, like cobots or AHUVs, automatic vehicles, and all that stuff. And that's absolutely necessary to really create more efficiency on the manufacturing shop floor. And what we were able to convince the management to say, if we want to connect all these things, and if we want to establish all these new services, not only a monolithic kind of execution service that was in place before, it is necessary to have the appropriate platform available. And the next thing was really to convince that we as a company, and also going towards a software company, that we can establish this platform together with a partner on our side, not only just using a cloud provider really down to the edges and say, okay, we just consume cloud services. No, we can really run this platform as a huge company as well. And that was these two things that Industry 4.0, and as we are a software company, we were able to convince management to get the money for really doing that transformation.
There's a question that came in from the audience that Eric and Arun, I'd love your thoughts on. And it's, I think his name is Al, asked this question. He said, is there any suggestions about containerizing legacy and COTS applications? And Eric, you guys have a pretty broad estate. You've taken a lot of applications and migrated them to containers. I don't know if any of those are COTS, but maybe you can talk a little bit about you know, it's an obvious question. You built this platform. You predominantly built it initially for new things that you were moving, that were kind of being built as cloud native. But as it's grown, how have you kind of taken on existing applications, migration of applications, and is that something you've done already, or are you planning to do?
Yeah. No, Shannon. I mean, it's a great question, and it's a good point to emphasize. For us, it's actually become containerization, right? Has become really a primary avenue for modernization. So we have focused initiatives at the highest level of our organization now that are focused on workload modernization, application modernization, and it really runs the gamut. I mean, what we saw initially, like you said, it's like, yeah, we're going to build all these cool microservice things. Well, reality is, a 108-year-old company, not everything is, you know, built out for cloud native, right? Like, we got to get there. We've got to figure out the roads to kind of merge and move technology forward. And we started to break down some of these monoliths. And reality is, these monoliths are really critical business workloads that underwrite our core line of business. Most of them are kind of the Web 1.0 nature, right? Like a lot of large J2E type applications. If you're familiar with middleware type technologies, things that run on WebSphere application servers are a really good example, right? That's a primary pattern across, I think, many companies over the last decade or so. And for us, that was something where it's like, well, it doesn't really fit that well in a container. But when we started to break it down, we looked more and more, and it's like, it actually does. And the container itself might look a little bloated in terms of, well, you got to run these large JVMs in there, and the memory footprint's much higher than what, you know, ideal container might look like. But in reality, actually, it kind of encapsulates that process really, really well. And what we found with that was that it helped us drive immense value back to the dev teams, where the old days of config drift were really, really challenging, right? Now everything's done declaratively, everything's done through code. So config drift actually fully goes away in this new model. And at the same time, we can push amazing densities. So it's not just a VM to VM pattern. We think about moving things to the cloud. It's a VM to container pattern. So you're getting much more benefit from a density perspective running out, whether it's a public cloud or not, running in a container format. So that's been super valuable for us. So I guess my advice on this would be, don't shy away from those workloads. Like, they might not look ideal for a container at the beginning of this, but reality is, replatforming to me has become a lot easier than the refactoring conversation. Refactoring takes a lot of time. Business doesn't always buy into it, and there isn't a lot of value at the end of the day by the time you look at investing in it. And on the COTS front, we're seeing more and more companies definitely bring things in as container images. Helm charts is a good example, whereas these COTS providers now, it's like, just take your Helm chart, put it in kubectl apply into your cluster, and the thing's up and running. Absolutely huge advantages for us there in terms of bringing that in, because we already have a Kubernetes API enabled infrastructure, and these solutions can now get up and running in minutes instead of weeks or months. So really good value there.
Great answer, Eric. Thanks for sharing so much of that. Arun, anything you'd add to that from your conversation?
I just want to double click on the COTS ecosystem, and I made this point in my presentation as well. We are starting to see many COTS ISVs rethinking, because it's beneficial for them as well, right? They're able to simplify their development and testing process. They're able to deliver new features faster to customers. So I think the ISVs see the writing on the wall, and that they are starting to go down that path. Arguably, the smaller ISVs are moving down this path much faster, and the bigger ISVs are going down this path much slower, because they are really trying to figure out the licensing and the pricing implications of the containerization model to their existing businesses. So there's kind of the classic innovator's dilemma, if you want to call it, that's kind of playing out with some of the bigger ISVs at this point in time.
That makes a lot of sense. We have more questions, a bunch of them. I know we're going to run out of time, so we'll try maybe have a couple last questions. One was a question from Glenn. He said, what was the distinguishing factor that elevated the use of Rancher over the competition? And I'll kind of add to that. I mean, it's a pretty self-serving question from us, but I would actually add one more, which is Rancher's open source. You guys all have access to Rancher. You could use it. You can use it for free. You don't need to work with us as a company. You all chose instead to partner and to to employ our support services. So maybe, if you don't mind, maybe Stefan, you can start this conversation, this one off, and just what was it? Why did you decide to work with Rancher? What has been helpful about working with the company in addition to just having the open source project to support you, and you know, any kind of standout features that really made this a good solution for you guys?
Yes, open source for sure was something that is a kind of starting point for us. So we were able to play around with Rancher already in the beginning before we really do this evaluation process. But at the end, we did an evaluation process, and what was very important for us was this multi-cluster environment, because you just mentioned having 45 locations, and we all have to run clusters there. So this management platform where we can run all these clusters, we can really manage them from a central point. That was one of the key features, but it was relevant for us at that time. We selected Rancher. I think for us Rancher was kind of leading there in this multi-cluster environment. And the second one, it was very close to the Kubernetes standard, they're very close to the Kubernetes standard, and that all the features that are built in Rancher are using the standard functionality of the open source community. And it was for us no login, vendor login, that was important, but having a solution and also the support with Rancher that we can really start with this journey. That was important for us.
Thanks. Brad, anything you would add from your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Stefan said, right? I liked it was vanilla Kubernetes and cloud agnostic. But the big differentiator for us was the team, right? We like you, Shannon.
It's really all me. It's just me. You made my day, Brad. Hey, Eric, anything you would add to that point?
Yeah, I mean, definitely echo all the statements Stefan and Brad just said. I think to add to that, the one piece that I think you guys stood out on and continue to do a good job with is just being innovative. I think bringing capabilities to market early, right? I think there's definitely some examples where you guys had leading capabilities to market earlier than others, and I think that the continued innovation there was a big key for us, as well as the fact that it just worked well across really any infrastructure supporting, our needs for hybrid multi-cloud was a critical component. So, and Rancher was great about being able to do that pretty much since your product's been created. So, I think some great value there for us.
Well, this is my last question, and it's one that I think sometimes for organizations that are kind of thinking about this. You guys have all been working on this. You saw the timelines. It was great. Everyone put a timeline out: 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Eric 5, 6 years. Brad 5 years. What I would kind of ask is, how do you when you look back at this, you all believe it was worth it. You all believe it was the right thing to have done, and it's had an impact. Is there any way to quantify that? Have you, when you look back and think now, how do you quantify and show the value of this journey, especially if you're just, you're maybe talking to someone who's considering this? It's a lot of work. Like you said, building a team, looking at technology, making decisions, transferring applications, replatforming. I love that term, Eric. How do you quantify the impact it's had on your organization? And any ways that you're able to do that? And I'll maybe start with Brad on this one.
Again, I'm going to come back to the business outcome. I'll pick on Sling, right? There's been times, I mean, think about, we live in crazy days with COVID, right? The Sling viewership is through the roof because people are watching news, right? They want to know about that, and then the presidential election in the US and all of that. We've had macro events where all of a sudden something happens and everybody jumps on, right? And from a business outcome perspective, without this technology and the infrastructure we built, we would have crashed and burned hard. And at this point we went, oh, what's going on? And everything just went, and it started to work, and everyone kind of got a little nervous and went, well, no whammies, right? And thankfully it held, right? And it's been amazing to see, right? I mean, we've added huge numbers to our concurrent, record subscriber counts. And again, it's about the business outcome, right? It's not about Kubernetes. It's not about anything else. It's about making our customer experience better. And this effort did that. So,
Eric, can you add to that from your perspective? I mean, you guys started this journey. I think you were on stage at one of the very first DockerCons, or if not the first, maybe the second or the third. So you've been really in the middle of this for as long as anyone I know. Can you quantify the impact it's had on Liberty Mutual?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely we've been through the ups and downs of this, Shannon. Absolutely. I mean, I think our early days were filled with some instability and some inefficiencies and capability that we were getting, but nonetheless, I think it's worked out to be hugely valuable for us. A lot of it was anchored on we run a lot of different infrastructure and platforms at, again, global scale, and we're always focused on how do we optimize that. So it's always a conversation of how do we better optimize the run and minimize kind of the run rate, right? And that's been a huge differentiator for us. But the different thing with this, it wasn't just an optimizer on run, it was also a transformational lever to focus how much more can we push our engineering practices and our developers to be able to focus on higher value activities. So it was a blend of that run optimize, where infrastructure as code, declarative kind of definition of everything, moving things at real kind of operational speed with some consistency has been a huge run gain. And the densities, right, that we can push at a higher level have been amazing. But then on the other side, we're able to now move capabilities forward much more quickly from a transformational perspective. So all of our digital capabilities that can be delivered on any flavor of really containerized infrastructure that's out there is just a great advantage. And I think now that we're seeing kind of the convergence in this space too, where everyone's kind of anchoring around Kubernetes and containers as that core infrastructure fabric going forward, we've got a great software delivery process that's enabled around this, which I think that's the huge accelerator, is really allowing our dev teams the freedom and the flexibility and choice that they can just start to build business capabilities much, much more quickly. So that was really I think the forefront of this for us. It really started to push that software delivery practice, that transformational lever, much further forward than it was previously.
And Stefan, why don't I give you the last word on this topic?
It's the big benefit what we really see and that we can already measure when it comes to deployment. So instead of really having weeks of deployment when we install software on Windows computers and Linux computers and whatever, and how many people we need to involve to get the things running, we can do that really in hours, at least days. And when it comes to complete rollout, global rollout, what we did then in months, and we had to set up project for doing technical rollouts, and now we can do that in days. And that is pretty much really the thing that really is the benefit for us, and that can be measured, and that can really, as also Eric says, we can focus on the valuable things and not on the operational things.
Awesome. Gentlemen, all of you, I appreciate so much the time you've taken today to share your stories, answer these questions. Arun, share all the insights you've gained talking to so many people. And in so many ways, Rancher, we would never be where we got to without all four of you. All of you I've known now for years and years and have been giving us fantastic advice, have been pointing us often in the right direction. So I want to thank you all for many, many things, especially for today. And thank everyone who attended, all of you who've come. I know there's a few questions left. I'll certainly respond to those as we go. Connie's just put up some ways to kind of learn more and get started. The one thing I will tell you, all of the teams on here, the first step they probably took with Rancher was downloading it and installing it and seeing it. Stefan said it really well. It's open source. It belongs to you. You have every right in the world to use it. This technology is very easy to set up. You can set it up on a single cluster. You can set it up on a single server and start the journey of what does it look like to embrace this type of transformation. So download the white paper, take a look at the website, but go get the software. GitHub.com/Rancher. That's the best place to start. Use this stuff, get it into the hands of your team. And we'd love to meet with all of you, have one-on-one conversations about the journeys you're on and see how we can help. So definitely take a look there. Perfect way to end. Thank you all. Thank everyone for speaking, and thank you all for coming today. We had over 1,000 people on this, so it was wonderful to have such a huge audience. Thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to meeting with you all soon. And everyone have a wonderful holiday season, and stay safe and have a happy 2021.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.